This is 9/11 Freefall.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your host, Andy Steele. Welcome to another episode of 9/11 Freefall. I'm honored to have as my guest tonight William Jacoby. He is part of a new 9/11 Truth legal team that's going to be taking on this issue and bringing it to the courts, using our justice system in the way it was meant to be, to try to achieve justice, in this case for the victims and their families and for America. Because, of course, we cannot move on as a nation until we acknowledge the fact that the 3 buildings in New York were brought down in controlled demolitions. So in the interview I'm going to play tonight, we talk about this new legal team, what it's going to be doing, how you out there listening, if you have a legal degree, if you are an attorney, you can help out. And at the end of this interview, I'll be telling you Mr. Jacoby's email so you can contact him and let him know how you can help. We also mentioned briefly during the interview the High-Rise Safety Initiative, and I haven't been able to talk much about that in the last couple of weeks because our interviews have run so long that I don't have much time for these intros. This is another pretty long interview tonight, so I'm not going to have a lot of time to talk about it, but I'll be talking about that more in coming weeks, and we'll be discussing what happened there. But it was a great effort, and it was a great attempt to try to get the city to pass that ballot initiative. The problem is that with 9/11 Truth, we got to overcome a lot of obstacles, and they're going to be working harder and harder to find any kind of way that they can trip it up, any way that they can stop it from getting on the ballot. They will. It's not like any other issue, and people out there trying to do what they can to do the right thing, they got a big mountain to climb, but they can do it. And we are winning every time we wake up people, every time we bring publicity to this issue, we win. So great job, everybody who's worked hard and everybody who keeps on working hard to expose the truth. Okay, before I play my interview with William Jacoby, we're going to do what we do every week. We're going to take 10 seconds of silence to remember the victims of 9/11 and their families and all the people who died in the wars that followed 9/11. We'll do that starting now. And that is 10 seconds. William Jacoby was the executive director of a community development corporation in East Harlem. He was president of 2 renewable energy startups. He was chief counsel for a municipal community development agency, and he was a director of rural development project in Peru and Bolivia, where he served as a Peace Corps volunteer many years ago. He's a brother in arms with me then. He has a Master's of Public Administration degree from the University of Pittsburgh. He's got a JD from Duquesne Law School and a BA in Government from Dartmouth College. In retirement, he divides his time between his homes in Costa Rica and Columbia County, New York. And now he's part of a new group comprised of attorneys that are going to be tackling the 9/11 issue head on. We'll be talking about that today. William, welcome to 9/11 Freefall.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here.
Now, I went over your background. Feel free to fill in any gaps that I left, anything that you think our audience should know about you as well.
I would say one of the things which has led me into this work, and I'm also working with architects and engineers in trying to facilitate the development of an interrelationships or communication among local action groups, is that I have seen the importance of organizing in tandem with legal action. I'm old enough to remember the civil rights movement, and I saw that legal action by itself was not sufficient without grassroots organizing and vice versa. So clearly lawyers do have something to contribute to the quest for 9/11 truth, and they also need the support of a broader-based organization.
That's right. And again, we're going through every single hoop that the system wants us to jump through. But as we've talked to attorneys previously on this show last year, the whole notion of blind justice isn't always in practice in the real world. So sometimes you got to put on that political pressure at the grassroots to make things happen in our society and any society. Now, the controlled demolition evidence. Everyone's always interested in why people take up this issue, how you woke up to this reality of what happened on 9/11. So we want to know this about you. How did you wake up to what really happened to the 3 buildings in New York?
Yeah, it's hard to specify the moment, but I'm sure that through the vagaries of surfing on the Internet into issues of great interest, I came upon the architecture and engineer video of controlled demolition, the DVD Experts Speak Out, and the related material to that. And it really kind of hits you between the eyes that it's something is amiss here. But the other approach to it is simply the recognition of all the evil that has flowed from that event. And if it almost seems from the standpoint of those who directed our policies in a number of directions that if 9/11 had not happened, it would have had to have been created, and perhaps it was. So that's part of what led me to this. I can remember how, and we know from so many other sources, how strained the relationship was between even the purported events of 9/11 and the invasions in Iraq and all of the actions which immediately followed it, as if everything had been planned in advance. And you know the story as well as I, but it's been a combination of the technical evidence and also historical research showing me that while people may think that the government could never do something so awful as be involved in creating the 9/11 events, in fact, it has, and it has done so. And what's novel is simply that we might be catching on.
What's fascinating to me as I interview new people every week, and I ask them this question pretty much all of the time, is where people were before 9/11. You know, you'll have certain people who will say, I was absolutely shocked after I came across this evidence. It changed my worldview. It changed my politics. It changed everything I knew about this country that I live in. And then there'll be other people who say, yeah, I knew this is what they do, and it didn't surprise me, and I was saying it right on the day of 9/11. Where were you before 9/11, mentally and knowing about the real situation that we live in?
Yeah, well, in terms of the bare facts of controlled demolition of the buildings, I would not have had I had no premonition or no advance thoughts about that, because I don't look at the world normally through the eyes of an engineer or an architect. If they told me that the buildings collapsed because of the planes, my initial inclination was to say, okay. But where I can't say that it totally disrupted my worldview when I began to appreciate what controlled demolition was and what it meant, because, as I say, I've been looking at other events in our history. I'd always been intrigued by how our country went from prosecuting war criminals at Nuremberg on the one hand, and almost simultaneously siphoning some of the worst of them out of the country, keeping that secret from us, and employing them in our foreign policy and strategic roles. So the notion that there was something unique about, uniquely troubling about what this would mean for our policy was not such a shock to me.
Right. It's just funny how this has changed so many people. A question I'm going to ask someday on the show and of our audience, we used to do a question of the week, is how did your politics change after 9/11? How did you look at the world differently? And it's fascinating to hear this from people. Now, you're a guy with a law degree, so you look at things very logically and what makes the strongest arguments. I'm curious, from your own perspective, what do you consider to be the strongest evidence from all the controlled demolition stuff that you've looked at? And what do you think could hold up in court if we could somehow magically get this before a jury?
Well, I'm not sure I can give you the most authoritative answer to that because there are many possible answers, but what strikes me is the presence of nanothermite. I think if that is essentially a controlled substance, to borrow the terminology from elsewhere, and it's not found normally in nature or in the New York City air, and all of a sudden it crops up, there ought to be an awfully convincing explanation of how it got there. That, along with the molten steel, those are the things which most jump out at me. But there may be other answers and better answers than that.
So let's jump to your team of lawyers, and I don't even know what it's called, even if it has an official name. I actually just found out about this thing a couple of days ago. That's why I wanted to have you on, because it's associated with an action alert that's going to be that just went out from AE 9/11 Truth or a bulletin that went out to everybody's email. But just starting with the team of lawyers, what is this? What are you guys doing? What do you hope to accomplish?
Well, as we said before, in attempting to change policy in the direction of permitting a complete independent, authoritative investigation of the events of 9/11, there has to be a legal component to that, particularly since it's obviously not a slam dunk to achieve this. There are various potential courses of action that can be taken, and no one of them by itself seems to be, none of them are easy, but any of them taken by itself is likely to be less successful than if several are undertaken together. There are lawyers around the country who have been courageously upholding the tradition of their profession and have stood up at great personal peril, certainly professional peril, and taken on cases involving victims of 9/11, and they've generally been getting squashed, not on the basis of a presentation of evidence and a finding that their evidence was insufficient, but by really preemptive action by courts, citing a decision called ITEK, I-T-E-K. Particularly, they have been strengthening the authority of courts to dismiss actions before they start on the grounds that they just sound implausible to the judge. Anyway, that's one of the challenges that we face. But whenever a strong government authority is deployed to crush or intimidate minority viewpoints, it becomes very important for us to look back at our Bill of Rights and see what can be used there to defend the rights of the minority and the rights to free speech. Obviously, those rights are under great assault, so the law is called upon to speak up. To answer from another standpoint, lawyers who are perhaps not initially interested in the events of 9/11 per se are finding that their professional world is being turned upside down as a consequence of 9/11. It's almost as if 9/11 were directed at aspects of the legal profession. Many lawyers have commented that the attorney-client privilege is really cast in doubt by the degree of surveillance that we're experiencing, and the justification for the surveillance is terrorism. The passage of legislation like the Patriot Act clearly affects our civil rights, and the justification for that was terrorism, and the justification for terrorism was 9/11. There are many more areas of the law that are being affected. Immigration law, for one, and I'm sure there's a half a dozen that will come to us as we talk. But the law itself and the rights that we cherish under the Constitution have been placed under very severe threats as a result of, in some cases, one might argue, have been eroded substantially as a result of 9/11. And if 9/11 was intentional, and then it flows that the erosion of those rights was perhaps intentional as well. So if we value the ability to help our clients safeguard and enforce their rights, we have to be concerned about analyzing the basis for this. Many court decisions have said that a claimed abuse by the government is justified because of the threat of terrorism, but that threat would seem that the claim of that threat would ring much more hollow if it were not so universally in the minds of our citizens and our judges that 3,000 people died in New York solely because of a terrorist act which overcame all of our best defenses.
Well, I want to go back to something you mentioned about how judges are allowed to throw out cases before they even get started based off of their opinions on how ridiculous it is or not ridiculous, whatever. And I'm no lawyer. I don't know what the standard was before this. The judges were allowed to do this. What is the standard? I mean, when is a judge allowed to throw something out? Because based off of that, just from that simple explanation that I got, a judge could say, well, this man wouldn't have murdered his wife. He's a well-respected member of the community. What would he have to gain from it? Well, judge, let us present that evidence. No, I'm throwing it out. Is he required to look at something before he makes this determination? And I just want to know a little bit more about this change in our legal process.
Yeah, I don't think I can answer that as fully as I would like to, because I don't have the source material. I would need to look back at it more carefully. But in general, I believe that there was an actual federal rule or interpretation in a case derived from a holding in a case involving a gentleman named Itek that in which he challenged. I don't recall the facts of the case, but his case was dismissed, and he challenged the seemingly arbitrary basis of the dismissal. And on appeal, the decision was that it was reasonable for the judge to have made that ruling because the courts could otherwise be clogged with frivolous litigation. There's always been some basis in the law for dismissing litigation as frivolous, but somehow the a priori determination that anything involving 9/11 is frivolous and needs to be confronted.
Well, and that just goes to show that it's not blind. It's based on the opinions and whims of a single person in that case. And my legal standard personally would be whether or not there's precedent for something happening before. That we there is precedent for not just the American people, but the community of the world all throughout history to be lied to about major events and to be lied to get them to back a war or whatever political agenda. So since there is precedent, and of course there's overwhelming evidence that there was controlled demolition that day, I don't think that any judge could seriously throw that out or even regard that as frivolous, whether or not they agree with the evidence or the opinion, whatever. Nobody can say it's frivolous. Now, if somebody says that I think my landlord is trying to control my mind with voodoo, yeah, that's frivolous. There's no recorded precedent for something like that taking place. I mean, I could see something like that being thrown out of the courts because that would be clogging up the system. But just the idea that anything related to 9/11, which should be the most scrutinized event in our history, is frivolous is just absolutely sickening. And that a judge could do that is ridiculous. Now, I want you to talk about, and I don't know how much experience you have with previous attempts to try to use the legal system to address this issue, this 9/11 issue. There's Building What campaign and the lawsuits that went on with that. There's been the High-Rise Safety Initiative. From what you know of previous attempts to get this through the legal system, can you comment? Where did things go wrong from what you know? What was done right? What could be done better?
I have really no criticism to offer of the movement that sought to put a ballot initiative before the voters of New York City. Has become apparent since their defeat, basically. There have been almost no successful efforts to accomplish this. And I guess if one were to criticize, it would be for having tried to do it in the first place. But that's not a valid criticism at all, because the law does, on its face, provide for citizen ballot initiatives in New York. The catch is in the small print, which virtually takes away the same right that it offers in its first breath. So it seems to me that an extraordinary effort was undertaken by a group to, in the first instance, they seemed to be doing everything right. They failed to meet the test under the Building What campaign a few years ago, but with really commendable patience, persistence, and devotion to the rule of law, they dissected how they were defeated in that occasion, and they came back with expert counsel and the use of professionals in areas where they suspected that there would be challenges, and they really did just about everything right. The grounds on which they were turned down are grounds which are very much sort of like in that category of frivolous that we talked about before. I won't say they're completely frivolous, but they are weasel words which can be interpreted any way one wants to. Was the proposed levy on certain kinds of real estate transactions as a means to finance the investigations that the initiative called for? Was that a tax or a fee? It's flip a coin. You can call it either one that you want to, and the judge chose to define it in a way that disenfranchised the will of 100,000 signatories. And the same with another provision of that action. So it just shows that the bottom line is that 100,000 people, and probably more, but 100,000 who signed their names were not given the opportunity to pursue this. And given that the justification was not solely based on concerns about controlled demolition, but were based on even on the assumption that there was no controlled demolition and that miraculously fires destroyed all three buildings, you would have thought that even people with no sympathy for the truth movement would have seen the value of finding out why something that flew so much against the acquired knowledge we had that's built into our building codes. You would think that we would want that studied so that lessons could be learned. It seems as though the very people who most wanted to deny that controlled demolition took place there also want to deny the possibility that fire could have caused it, because they don't really believe that, or they would have wanted to take more they would have wanted to support an investigation that would have brought out practical measures that could be taken to prevent an action like that in the future.
I like what you said about that they shouldn't have done it at all is not a valid criticism. I think everything and anything that could be done should be done, and it's commendable what Ted Walter did and what he's probably going to do in the future. I mean, this isn't over yet. And what people tend to lose sight of when things like this happen is the fact that exposing something like this is very hard. You know, I equate it to being the last kid on your dodgeball team as all your other teammates were wiped out. If you remember that in gym class, especially if you're the kind of kid that hung back and didn't participate, suddenly you find yourself up against 15 people and there's 15 dodgeballs coming back at you. It's pretty hard to avoid them all unless you're Spider-Man or something. Okay, that's kind of what we're up against. Now, any dodgeball that they can throw at a ballot initiative like this, they are going to look for. It's not the same as if you tried to get a ballot initiative passed to rename the some auditorium the Michael Bloomberg Memorial, or not Memorial, but the Michael Bloomberg Auditorium, where everyone will just kind of clap and smile and say, "Oh, isn't that so nice?" Or saying that we want to donate this amount of money for cancer research or whatever. These nice clean issues that nobody can really object to, that political agendas are not attached to. That's a lot easier. You're not going to be having people look down in every nook and cranny and find every way that they can to trip it up. So this is very hard. Using the legal system against itself, against the system that has been used to cover up this issue, is not something that is going to be figured out in one step. And so, again, those people should be commended for what they've done and what they continue doing.
Right. Well, one comparison that comes to mind for me is the struggle for equal rights in this country. It goes back to your earlier points about frivolous lawsuits and actions. For the longest time, the notion that slavery was unjust was considered a frivolous idea. And the actions that were taken against people who raised constitutional challenges to segregation were dismissed more violently than anything that we're facing with the 9/11 movement right now. Basically, that issue came to a head and 600,000 Americans died over the issue, and yet the issue was really not resolved for another 99 years in the courts. And during that whole period, even with the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, because public opinion hadn't moved sufficiently in certain areas, all that legal ammunition remained insufficient to change the course of our policy. What's different, I think, this time in 9/11 is that it's not merely entrenched public attitudes, it's that those attitudes have been perhaps created and certainly reinforced by propaganda financed by ourselves as taxpayers, administered by the government, and inserted in our brains through methods that most of us are completely unaware of. And so, in a sense, we're fighting not just some deeply entrenched cultural attitude or something. We're confronting propaganda that we are really unaware of and ill-prepared to cope with.
Where I think people get impatient is because we're seeing the after effects of the post-9/11 world. We're seeing it after the post-9/11 event, I should say. We saw it immediately. I mean, every cog and wheel that they wanted to turn right after 9/11 was pulled off went into motion, and people see the fence gate open right now, and they want it shut. They want it shut. They want 9/11 exposed. And so, talking about hundreds of years and then another however many decades after, comparing it to slavery, for a lot of people, they say, well, we don't have that long. We need to get a lid on this right now. And I understand that to a certain extent, but the process is what it is. And even as we run into trouble trying to get it through the legal system, trying to go through official channels, we do educate more people. And so in turn, as we wake up more folks through publicity surrounding things like the High-Rise Safety Initiative, we take more weapons out of the other side's arsenal because more people are aware of this. We're all watching them. Now, do you think it's possible to get justice on this issue in America? I've talked about this before. We said it all the time. I'm sounding like a broken record. Justice isn't blind. Can we get a judge or just the system in general to look at this fairly? And even if they look at this fairly and it gets treated fairly and we triumph in the end, it might get overturned in some other court. Do you think it's possible for America to handle this rationally and neutrally?
Yes, I do. It won't be easy, and it will take a lot of courage, and there will be some martyrs along the way. But I do think so, because I guess I'd have to attribute it a lot to the Internet. And consequently, I think that's one reason why the Internet is likely to be under considerable assault, as it has been for a while and will continue to be. But in the learning curve for us as a society is speeding up. Although, as you correctly say, the amount of time we have to learn we don't have much time to learn our lessons before the clock runs out on us. But for example, that new movie whose title I've forgotten, but you will know, about Gary Webb and the discovery of CIA involvement in importing cocaine into Los Angeles in connection with the Iran-Contra thing. That speaks a great deal about the power of secret government and the uses to which secrecy is put. Here was a government program addressing foreign policy issues which are kept away from from the American public, but which looked at was willing to sacrifice a generation of young people to cocaine in order to, because that wasn't the priority of the clique, which was behind the policy against Nicaragua. That kind of weighing and balancing of policies was not something that could have been put before the public, because the public would not have stood for that. So if we can see that such rash and irrational things could happen in the name of secrecy, the outcry against secrecy can only get louder. I mean, from so many fields, people are reacting to the fact that we still have Kennedy assassination records involving the CIA that are still classified after 50 plus years. Basically, we can trace a lot of our problems, including 9/11, to the fact that in the aftermath of World War II, a cloak of secrecy was placed over so many things which economic forces and industrial forces wanted to protect, and we just let that go on for a long time because we were oblivious to it. But more and more events are coming about, and from Oliver Stone's movies some decades ago to the movie we're just talking about now, and to other instances where there's a general loss of confidence and, frighteningly, a loss of legitimacy for government. And the courts can act as a vital safety valve to protect the legitimacy of our government, as they have many times in the past. But we just have to keep knocking, and I think we'll face increased resistance and until at some point either the opposition will be crushed or the upholders of all of this secrecy will be forced to give way.
Yeah, and we talk about it all the time, is that one of the issues with getting justice on this is people's fear. I mean, I face this just trying to get pamphlets distributed in a certain place. You talk to the person in charge of it, and they look at the pamphlets, very simple information regarding the controlled demolition evidence, not pointing any fingers at any particular party, and they turn into Bob Newhart. I don't know if anyone's ever seen those old shows where he tries to, he's very nervous about something or trying to cover up something, and he starts stuttering, and it's supposed to be comedy, but it's not comedy when it involves something this big. Then it's scary. Then it's sad. And I don't know what you do about that. I don't know what you do about that in the legal process. It's something that people have to accomplish or conquer within themselves, being able to say, well, I'm going to do the right thing here, let justice be done though the heavens may fall. But you talked about something earlier in what you just said that I think is very important and very pertinent to why 9/11 Truth needs to be out in the open and exposed, is that the government is losing all legitimacy. I mean, ruling with fear can only get you so far, till people are not afraid anymore, till people mentally pull themselves away from the system. We saw in World War II where people, after Pearl Harbor, and I'm not going to talk about the history of Pearl Harbor or whether or not that was allowed to happen, that's not what the show is about, but just after Pearl Harbor, where people ran to the army and wanted to defend America, and that super patriotism, that gets eroded, all right? People are not going to be as eager to go out and defend mom and apple pie on the 4th of July. They don't believe America anymore. They don't believe the system is really working for them. Then they're going to be more like just passive, apathetic, observers. Something happens and they'll just kind of say, well, that's their problem. It's not mine. That's what happens when people lose faith in their system. And you're absolutely right when you say that the courts have to act as a steam valve for this. I think the courts are the last line of defense for civil society in America, where people can still believe in their Constitution. And this is the important issue that can show that we can really be America still if we can face this and expose this. But it really depends on people who are not on this show, people who may not even be listening to this show, out there in the middle who aren't as passionate about exposing this issue. Can they face the evidence and make it their issue if it gets presented to them? I don't know.
Well, that's certainly the paradox here is that the 9/11 Truth Movement is really a very centrist movement. I mean, when you talk about the things that separate the left from the right, really, the left and the right should not, or I don't think are separated by views about the importance of preserving the Constitution. That's something that people should be coming together to defend, and no one could possibly to believe that the official version of 9/11 is true should only spur one all the more to want an investigation to prove it to the doubters and prove them to be eccentrics and so on. And in that respect, everybody really ought to be on the same page. Just prove to me that it's that 9/11 was a natural or was a terrorist event, and just prove it to me with unassailable evidence and by confronting arguments with arguments, and we'll all go away. But we don't think that that's likely to happen, given the evidence of fleeing from the pattern of fleeing from the evidence. But I do think that coming back to your earlier point, lawyers do have, and the law does have a role to play. I've been speaking with leaders of local action groups for 9/11 Truth around the country, and one little example out in St. Louis, a group wanted to parade around in a city park, carrying a sign saying 9/11 was an inside job, and the city didn't want them in the park, and they tried to carve out a small area which they called a free speech area, and the group decided, no, that's not right. America is a free speech area, not just a small quadrangle in this park. So they resisted. They were actually arrested. And in that case, the ACLU apparently came to their defense and negotiated with the city. They backed off, and the people who were arrested actually won financial compensation. Well, that was done through the grace of either the ACLU or an ACLU attorney. I'm not quite sure how that worked. But even in New York City, where we were passing out leaflets in front of the 9/11 Museum, that park, the police were telling us, is private property. It's private property, but it's owned by a nonprofit corporation that owns the 9/11 Museum, as I understand it. And that should be a free speech area, too. And yet, generally speaking, our protests have tried to skirt that. And it's an example of an erosion of our rights, which we need to come back at and look at carefully. One reason we want to reach out to, and I want to use this opportunity to extend an invitation to any lawyers who may be listening or people who have lawyers who are close friends, we could really use more lawyers joining the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 inquiry, because one thing which we have not been doing much up till now, but we would like to if there were more lawyers involved, is to participate more closely with the other grassroots local action groups around the country to just contribute their knowledge and perspective to local initiatives.
To find out more about your group, do you guys have a website, any way to contact an official?
We are working towards a website. People may have noticed a website, let me see if I've got the title right, Lawyers for 9/11 Truth. That was a predecessor event. That website has been stagnant for a while, but we are working on essentially taking over responsibility for that website. The transition is not complete, but we are in agreement with the people who put that together. So you can see on that website right now some evidence of past efforts to organize lawyers. We have probably about 20, 25 or so lawyers who have expressed interest in our work. On any given Sunday night, there may be 5 to 10 on the phone, and those 5 to 10 have taken on various assignments to pursue projects which we have discussed. And that number can and will be growing as we as we get more consolidated. But a part of that would be for those of you who are hearing this to help us spread the word, because the lawyers who have gotten involved in this see it as having a lot of potential to help them realize their desire to address this issue in the face of all of the barriers that are set up to it. One of the areas that we would like to move into, and this may be of more general interest, is lawyers have to have a requirement to take continuing legal education courses. And when you recast the issue of 9/11 into the terms of post-9/11 law and the consequences that 9/11 had for our legal system, there's a lot that can be bundled together there and presented both in the first instance to lawyers as a part of this continuing legal education requirement, but by extension to non-lawyers as well. So we see a value. We'd be interested in hearing from people who would like to contribute to that process of bringing together research, some of which is you don't need to be a lawyer to do, and some of which where being a lawyer helps, so that we can put together continuing legal education for lawyers, and help to build the base of people who understand more about our hidden history and what contribution that hidden history has made to 9/11 and to post-9/11 law.
Well, that's a call out to any modern-day Atticus Finches out there, and for anybody who maybe was sleeping during English class, that's a reference to the fictional character in To Kill a Mockingbird, who stands up for the black character. I can't remember his name, when he's unjustly and wrongly accused of attacking a woman. And we can look at a character like that and say, yeah, he's a great, noble guy, as we look back at history and say, yeah, that racism was wrong. But the real valor is standing up in the time period when a certain issue is unpopular. Like, racism, being anti-racist back then in the South was unpopular, so it was very, very admirable for him to stand up and defend this person back then. Well, it'd be very admirable for somebody to stand up on this issue now, 9/11 truth, because in the future they're going to be looking back at this time and saying, hey, those people were right. So that's a call out to those people who want to be at the forefront of history. Now, we have an email that went out from AE 9/11 Truth earlier in the week. I mentioned it before. The title of the email is FEMA Points Finger at NIST, Who Points Back at FEMA? And this involves some legal action that's going to be taking place. Can you talk about this?
Yeah, a little, and I would encourage people to look up the Architects and Engineers website and make sure that they're on the mailing list to receive the e-blasts that come out of that organization, so they can get the full details. But briefly speaking, there are many researchers, but one particular researcher who's been working closely with us is an outstanding independent researcher, David Cole, has been filing many Freedom of Information Act requests to FEMA and NIST and other organizations, agencies as well. He's gotten a fair amount of material, including the material that allowed him to, for example, observe that the NIST report included basically fraudulent or false information about the structure of the building itself, that they were able to advance a theory of collapse, which was really not meritorious in any case, but was based upon computer modeling showing a collapse under certain circumstances, but the circumstances included a definition of the structure which omitted certain key structural elements, which made their theory impossible. So David found that out working with colleagues, and made that information known, and he wouldn't have been able to do it had he not been so aggressive, really, about seeking documents that were initially the required Freedom of Information Act requests to obtain. But much as he has gotten documents, many more have remained to be released. He estimates that there's some 490,000 documents, videos, and photographs and other kinds of information that are still not revealed. And the response he's getting is not an argument that, oh, we can't release it because of X or Y. Sometimes he gets that, but more often he just gets stonewalled in spite of the fact that the law is extremely clear that after a certain number of days, the government agency has to provide the information, unless, again, it falls within a few explicit categories. But they're not citing those categories. They're just saying, we'll do it, and they don't do it. So he came to our committee and asked for help in getting support, legal support to sue NIST and FEMA, which had some records as well. And we, in turn, spoke with architects and engineers, and we're happy to say that architects and engineers has agreed to raise funds to support this kind of litigation. We've helped to supply an attorney who's working out this on a very low cost, a very reduced rate basis, and with some volunteer input from our group. And we hope that this will create a flood of new information out of FEMA and NIST, and who knows what more that will teach us.
Now, we had on Jerry B., who's one of David Cole's colleagues that helped unearth the incorrect information in NIST's World Trade Center 7 report. And he brought up this whole concept of maladministration. That's actually the title of one of his videos, because you have the word NIST in there, so it makes it kind of a clever title. And how basically if you do such a bad job, if you're a public official tasked with an important responsibility, such as, I don't know, investigating the destruction of the World Trade Center towers, and you do such a bad job that you could be considered incompetent, you can be prosecuted. That's my understanding of it. Now, I don't think we have anything like that here in America, but how prosecutable are people at NIST for making these errors? I know you have to establish first whether or not it was just a mistake or on purpose. Obviously, on purpose would be criminal fraud, I think. But how prosecutable is NIST for screwing up on such a huge scale like this?
Right, and let's talk about the role of prosecutors afterwards, but as a add-on to that. But specifically to your point, one point of contact here is the professional responsibilities of engineers and architects in general, their licensing requirements, and the statutory responsibilities of NIST. I can't quote language on either of those points without digging it up, but I do know that there's a very clear statement in the professional codes applicable to engineers, as in their licensing procedures, obliging them to report fraudulent activity by their colleagues, false information that may have made its way into a structure or might be en route to being incorporated into a structure which could risk human lives. There are substantial ethical burdens borne by engineers and architects which have been introduced into the law. So fraudulent engineering, fraudulent architecture, and including knowing silence about such acts is grounds at least for losing your license, and I think probably more could be said, but I don't want to misstate the law. So when we find, as I have heard, that many people in the NIST investigatory team, which includes consultants, are very knowledgeable about nanothermite from their past work, but as a group, NIST has said, well, we didn't find any nanothermite, but admitted that they didn't find it because they didn't look for it. That suggests a degree of putting your head in the sand, which is suspiciously close to willful. So I know there are discussions. Our group has not undertaken them personally, but directly, but it's certainly fair game to ask whether charges are potentially can be brought on those grounds. Essentially, we've raised the same question with regard to prosecution initially in a non-confrontational, quiet way. We worked with architects and engineers to prepare a letter to Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance, asking him to convene a new grand jury to investigate the new evidence, and meaning nanothermite, arguing that he has a responsibility to prosecute 3,000 deaths in his district, and that's not a federal jurisdictional question. It's a state law. It's against state law to murder people, but our response has been silence. So it's not clear to us at this point that there is a remedy for that kind of an answer in the courts, but it is an area that cries out for citizen action, because we expect to have the laws against murder enforced by prosecutors in our country.
That's right. And also, too, I think that they're guilty of a sort of malpractice. I mean, folks, if a doctor makes some mistake, let's say that he leaves an instrument in somebody that may not cause an immediate danger to the person, but ends up causing them to have health problems later on or eventually die, I believe they could still be prosecuted or at least sued for malpractice. Well, in this case here, if you don't do a real investigation of 9/11, a real investigation of what brought down Building 7, and it leads the public to believe that certain parties were involved when maybe they weren't, or maybe there was more to the story, and then foreign policy is built around it, domestic policy is built around it. With a foreign policy, people die in the wars that follow. So now somebody's dead because of a potentially bogus 9/11 official story. You've caused that person to die. I'm going to repeat that. If you work at NIST and you knowingly ignore information that could point to, and we don't get into complicity, but obviously it's going to open up the whole 9/11 investigation again. If it could point to another party being involved in 9/11 and you let these wars happen and soldiers die, you're responsible for their deaths. You killed them. Maybe you didn't pull the trigger, but you stayed silent. And that's just as bad as the Nazis who, the German people who saw people being taken to the camps and stayed quiet and then claimed later that they didn't know anything about it, okay? You're on the wrong side of history, but more importantly, you are responsible for their deaths. That's my position on that.
Yeah, just, and of course, in much of what I'm saying, of course, I'm just speaking for myself here because we don't have our lawyers group is not a corporate entity, and so much of what I'm saying are personal observations and have to do with what led me to participate in these activities. But certainly what I was saying about the engineers, that's directly comparable to what you said about doctors. And there's a point beyond which we can't just point the finger at professionals. We have to point it at ourselves. If we look at the example of Edward Snowden, for example, the information he released is demonstrably true because he provided documentary evidence. Almost no one is questioning the veracity of his statements. They may be questioning whether he had the right or whether it was right for him to reveal information that was secret. But the information is clearly true, and it clearly shows that we've been playing pretty fast and loose with the Constitution, and yet we know that there are tens of thousands of people working in the NSA and in the other intelligence agencies, and very few are coming forward with the same courage and sense of principle that Snowden showed. Snowden was acting upon the Nuremberg principle that I can't be excused just because I was following orders. But we seem to have a lot of people who think that following orders is just fine. And as long as we have that attitude deeply entrenched, we're going to be in trouble.
You're right. Now, you also mentioned, because we're running down to our last couple of minutes here, the role of prosecutors. Something you wanted to add with that? I want to give you a chance.
Yeah, one thing we're doing is we are preparing a letter did go to Cyrus Vance, and we are looking to prepare a letter to Eric Holder or his successor, urging again a new investigation. And in that regard, we are collecting, working with architects and engineers to collect affidavits from architects and engineers as to the key technical points that would be at issue in such an investigation. We're not sure where that will lead, but we feel that we would be remiss if we did not put ourselves on record in requesting that all of this information, which has been developed over the past 13 years, be re-examined, because anybody who thinks that the initial examination was a complete and rigorous one clearly doesn't know what they're talking about.
I just want to ask you, from what you see, from your own perspective, what happens if we don't expose 9/11? What happens if we don't get justice on this issue and the court system doesn't hear this issue out in some kind of official capacity? What happens to America and to our people?
Well, I'm no great prophet, but I certainly share the apprehension. If we have, it means a further unrestrained use of secrecy, further unrestrained deprivation of civil liberties, further unrestrained exercise of the war-making power. It's not a pretty picture, and we clearly need to bring the people back into government and to erode secrecy, hold people accountable. I think there needs to be accountability in general. As long as there's no accountability in government, what can we expect?
That's right. We can expect more of the same and more of a steady decline into what we're seeing. I mean, again, we haven't even hit rock bottom yet, folks. This is just the beginning of what we can expect, what you've seen here in the post-9/11 world. And I think that the post-9/11 truth world, where we acknowledge it, is so much of a better place, and nothing will ever be perfect. But if you can get the American people and you can get our system to acknowledge what really happened on that day, we can recover. The same way that the people in Germany have recovered and faced the past, and they talk about it openly now, and it's something that they always say, we'll never do again. Well, we can have that mantra here in America too. Never again will we allow our system to be manipulated and to have our media and our justice system used against the people who are simply telling the truth. We will not let truth be used as a slur against folks who want justice. William Jacoby, I want to thank you so much for coming on 9/11 Free Fall, and good luck with what you're doing.
Thank you, Andy. Best of luck to you.
If you are an attorney or you have some kind of legal knowledge that would help out and you want to be part of the team that we talked about tonight, the legal team for 9/11 Truth, you can contact our guest at wsjacoby@hotmail.com. That's wsjacoby@hotmail.com. Remember, you can hear this program every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. You can also download MP3s of this show from the Internet Archive by going to 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying have a great week and good luck.